He was cast into the timeless void at the end of the First Age, defeated and humiliated, but the first Dark Lord's shadow would stretch across all the ages that followed. Today we're exploring the subtle, pervasive ways that Morgoth's ancient evil continued to shape Middle-earth long after his chains were forged, and he was thrust through the door of night. From the very matter of the world itself to the fates of individuals thousands of years later, Morgoth's influence ran deeper than most realize. When we think of evil in Middle-earth, most of us think of Sauron and the One Ring. But what if I told you that Morgoth's corruption was far more insidious, far more inescapable? What if the entire world itself had become his ring? Let's begin with the War of Wrath in the year 587 of the First Age. After more than 40 years of devastating conflict, the host of Valinor finally breaks through Angban's defences. The great dragon Ankalagan the Black falls, shattering the towers of Thangorodrim. Morgoth, cowering in the deepest pits of his fortress, is dragged forth. The Valar strike the Silmarils from his iron crown, which they beat into a collar for his neck. He is thrust through the door of night into the timeless void, where he is to remain until the prophesied end of the world. The war is won. Evil is defeated. Or is it? The answer, according to Tolkien's later writings, is far more troubling. For while Morgoth's physical form was banished, something of him remained. Something that could never be removed without the complete destruction of the world itself. In his essays compiled in the volume known as Morgoth's Ring, Tolkien explored a concept that fundamentally changes how we understand evil in Middle-earth. He wrote, "Just as Sauron concentrated his power in the One Ring, Morgoth dispersed his power into the very matter of Arda. Thus, the whole of Middle-earth was Morgoth's ring." Let that sink in for a moment. The entire world had become Morgoth's ring. But how did this happen? To understand, we need to go back to Morgoth's original nature and his long campaign against the children of Ilúvatar. When the Valar first entered Arda to prepare it for the awakening of Elves and Men, Morgoth came with them. But unlike his fellow Valar who sought to build and shape according to Eru's vision, Morgoth sought to dominate and control. To do this, he didn't merely wage war with armies of orcs and bullrogs. He did something far more fundamental. He began to pour his own essence, his own being, into the physical matter of the world. You see, in Tolkien's metaphysics, the Ainur, which includes both the Valar and the Maiar, are primarily spirit beings. They can take physical form, but they are not bound to it. Morgoth, in his desire to control every aspect of Arda, chose to become increasingly incarnate, to bind himself more and more to physical form. And as he did so, he didn't just inhabit a body, he spread his essence throughout the very substance of the earth itself. This process took countless ages. Every mountain he demolished, every sea he spilled, every living thing he corrupted, in each act of destruction and domination, Morgoth was investing more of himself into the world. By the time of the War of Wrath, he had become so bound to physical form that he was actually afraid to engage in battle himself, a far cry from the mighty Valar, who once fought all the others combined. But what did this mean for Middle-earth? It meant that outside the blessed realm of Valinor, all matter contained what Tolkien called the Morgoth element, or the Morgoth ingredient. Every rock, every tree, every blade of grass, every drop of water, though water was held to be purer than land, carried within it a trace of Morgoth's corrupting essence. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. This wasn't just philosophical, it had real, measurable effects on the inhabitants of Middle-earth. All living things that had physical bodies were nourished by the matter of Arda, which meant they were, in a very real sense, taking Morgoth's corruption into themselves. As Tolkien wrote, they had, as it were, a tendency, small or great, to go astray. The children of Ilúvatar, Elves and Men, were supposed to have complete control over their physical forms through their spirits. But the Morgoth element in their bodies created a constant battle between the pure spirit and the corrupted flesh. It was a built-in vulnerability to evil that could never be fully overcome while they remained in Middle-earth. Men suffered from this more than elves. Tolkien theorized that men had relatively less control over their bodies by their spirits, which allowed the corruption of Morgoth that existed in the physical aspect of Arda to enter them more easily. This, he suggested, was why so many men were seduced by Morgoth in their early days. And here's the tragic irony. Men were originally meant to be the solution to this problem. In Eru's original design, the chief function of men was to undo the marring of Arda and bring about what was called Arda healed, a world cleansed of Morgoth's taint. But when men fell under Morgoth's influence early in their history, they lost this ability. They were stripped of their cosmic purpose, their destiny to heal the world. So the world itself remained what Tolkien called Arda Marad, a world fundamentally corrupted at its very foundation. Now, you might be wondering, if this is true, how could Sauron use the Ring of Power? How could there be any magic at all? Here's where it gets even more interesting. The Morgoth element wasn't just a passive corruption, it was actually a prerequisite for the kind of sorcery that Sauron practiced. In Tolkien's notes, he wrote, "It was this Morgoth element in matter, indeed, which was a prerequisite for such magic and other evils as Sauron practiced with it and upon it." Think about that. When Sauron forged the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom, he wasn't just using gold and his own power. He was tapping into Morgoth's essence that permeated the very rock and lava of Orodruin. The location itself, a volcanic mountain that had been raised by Morgoth's discord in the ancient days, contained a particularly strong concentration of the Morgoth element. Sauron, of course, inherited this corruption of Arda. Unlike Morgoth, who spread himself throughout the world, Sauron concentrated his power in the rings, but he built upon the foundation that his master had laid. Every spell, every enchantment, every work of dark sorcery relied on the Morgoth element already present in the fabric of reality. This is why, even after Sauron's defeat, evil could still arise in Middle-earth. It's why Gandalf warns in his confrontation with Saruman that the defeat of Sauron won't mean the end of all evil. The corruption runs too deep, woven into the very atoms of existence. But Morgoth's influence wasn't just in the physical world, it lived on in the creatures he had spawned and the peoples he had twisted. The orcs, which Morgoth created by capturing and tormenting elves in the ancient days, continued to plague Middle-earth throughout all the ages. They bred and multiplied, especially in dark places like the Misty Mountains and Mordor. While many were destroyed in the War of Wrath, and again, at the end of the Third Age, they could never be fully eradicated because they had become a race unto themselves. The Balrogs, those terrible Maiar who cloak themselves in shadow and flame to serve Morgoth, also survived. We know that when the Valar broke Utumno at the end of the Years of the Lamps, they didn't discover all its deepest, darkest places. Many Balrogs escaped. One of them was Durin's Bane, who slept beneath Moria for 5,000 years before being awakened by the dwarves deep delving in the Third Age. How many others might have remained hidden in the dark places of the world? The dragons too were Morgoth's creation. While the greatest of them, Ankalagan the Black, Glaurung, were slain, we know that dragons survived even to the end of the Third Age. Smaug attacked Erebor in the year 2770 of the Third Age, and there are hints in Tolkien's writings of dragons in the Far East and South that may have endured even longer. And then there were the lesser Umayar, corrupted Maiar who served Morgoth but weren't as powerful or as notable as Sauron or the Balrogs. What happened to them after the War of Wrath? Some were certainly destroyed, but Tolkien leaves open the possibility that weaker evil spirits might have survived, fleeing to distant parts of Middle-earth, where they could continue to work mischief, influencing corruptible men and sowing discord. We see hints of this in places. When Gandalf fights the Balrog in the depths beneath Moria, he speaks of nameless things, gnawing at the foundations of the world, creatures older than Sauron that even he doesn't fully understand. Were these remnants of Morgoth's ancient works, or were they something else, something that belonged to the darkness even before Morgoth fell? But perhaps the most insidious aspect of Morgoth's lingering influence was psychological and spiritual. Consider the story of Húrin and his children, one of the great tragedies of the First Age. When Húrin is captured at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Morgoth tries to torture the location of Gondolin out of him. Húrin refuses even under the most terrible torments, so Morgoth takes a different approach. He binds Húrin to a seat atop Thangorodrim and curses him, saying, "Upon all whom you love my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death." Then Morgoth forces Húrin to watch as this curse plays out. For 28 years, Húrin sits imprisoned, witnessing through Morgoth's sight as his son Túrin and daughter Númenor are destroyed by a cascade of tragedy and misfortune. Here's the question that has fascinated Tolkien scholars for decades. Was this truly a supernatural curse, or was it simply Morgoth's will and manipulation working through the Morgoth element already present in the world? Tolkien himself seems to have been ambiguous on this point. In The Children of Húrin, he has characters debate whether such a curse is even possible. Húrin himself comes to doubt that Morgoth has such power over the fates of men who are not bound by destiny in the way elves are. But Christopher Tolkien, in his notes, suggests that the curse might be understood as Morgoth designing the future through the force of his gigantic will, not invoking some higher power, but exerting his own influence through the corruption he had already woven into Arda. The curse works because Morgoth has already made himself part of the world's fabric. His thought really does weigh upon things like a cloud, because his essence is everywhere. The tragedy of Túrin becomes even more poignant when we consider that he might have escaped the curse through his own choices. Tolkien writes that as Túrin's power and fame grew, Morgoth actually began to fear that the curse that he had laid upon him would become void, and Túrin would escape the doom that had been designed for him. But Túrin's pride, itself perhaps influenced by the Morgoth element, ensures his fall. He is doomed to what Tolkien calls seeing with Morgoth's eyes, unable to trust, unable to accept good counsel, alienating his friends and making choices that lead to ruin. Even Túrin's great sword, Gurthang, which he uses to slay Glaurung the dragon, seems touched by Morgoth's malice. When Túrin finally learns the truth of his marriage to his own sister Númenor, he speaks to the sword, asking it to take his life. And the sword answers him, a blade speaking, animated perhaps by the very corruption woven into the metal from which it was forged. This brings us to an uncomfortable truth. In Tolkien's conception, there was no escaping Morgoth's influence while dwelling in Middle-earth. The elves knew this. It's part of why so many of them chose to sail west to Valinor, the only land free from the taint. Those who remained, like Galadriel, like Círdan, like Elrond, did so knowing they were dwelling in a marred world, forever fighting against a corruption that was woven into reality itself. The men of Númenor learned this lesson in the hardest way possible. When they achieved great power and long life, they began to chafe against their mortality, envying the immortality of the elves. Sauron, captured by them and brought to Númenor, played upon these fears. But he didn't create these fears. They grew from the Morgoth element itself, from the corruption in their own bodies that made their fear, spirits, struggle for control over their hrua, bodies. Sauron's great lie, that Morgoth was the true king of the world, and that Melkor, not the Valar, should be worshipped, found fertile ground because Morgoth's influence was real and tangible. The darkness was already there. Sauron merely showed them how to embrace it. And here's something that often gets overlooked. Even in the Third Age, Morgoth's name still held power. When the Balrog appears in Moria, Legolas identifies it as a Balrog of Morgoth, even though Morgoth had been gone for more than 7,000 years. The name itself carries weight, a reminder of ancient terror. Treebeard, when speaking to Merry and Pippin, explains that trolls were created by the enemy in the great darkness, in mockery of Ents, as orcs were of elves. The enemy, Morgoth, remains the reference point for evil, even in an age dominated by Sauron. And remarkably, according to Tolkien's notes, by the end of the Third Age, Sauron had grown so bold as to claim to be Morgoth returned. He took on his master's identity, using that ancient name to inspire terror and loyalty in his followers. Think about what that means. 3 ages after Morgoth's banishment, his name alone was still more fearsome than Sauron's own. The first Dark Lord's shadow stretched that far. But there's another aspect of Morgoth's lingering influence we need to discuss, one that points toward the future. In some of Tolkien's writings, there's a prophecy called the Dagor Dagorath, the Last Battle. According to this prophecy, given by Mandos, When the world grows old and the Valar grow weary, Morgoth will find a way to break through the door of night and return to Arda. Now, it's important to note that Tolkien later seems to have abandoned this idea. Christopher Tolkien chose not to include the full prophecy in the published Silmarillion because his father had written in later years that none of Mandos's dooms had declared whether the marring of Arda would ever be repaired. But the concept is fascinating because it suggests that Morgoth's influence might not just be passive corruption, it might be building toward something. The Morgoth element spread throughout Arda might be like a beacon, a way for him to find his way back, or even to exert some influence from the void itself. Some of Tolkien's notes hint that Morgoth might be able to reach out from the void, making his voice heard, like a silent whisper tempting the children of Eru towards evil. His essence, spread throughout the world, might act like an echo, having its own dark will that serves Morgoth's ends even in his absence. It's a chilling thought, that the corruption isn't just a lingering stain, but something semi-sentient, always working toward its master's return. Whether or not the Dagor-Dagorath ever comes to pass, the point remains. Morgoth's influence can never be fully removed from Middle-earth without remaking the world itself. That's why, in all the prophecies, true healing requires the destruction and recreation of Arda. The Silmarils must be recovered and broken, their light used to rekindle the two trees of Valinor. Only then can new light spread across all the world, cleansing it and allowing for what Tolkien called Arda healed. Until such a remaking, every victory against evil in Middle-earth is necessarily incomplete. Sauron's defeat matters enormously. It saves the free peoples from immediate domination and destruction, but it doesn't remove the fundamental corruption that Morgoth wove into existence. This is why the elves ultimately have to leave. It's why even after the One Ring is destroyed, Galadriel's power fades and Lothlorien cannot remain as it was. The elves are too tied to the fate of Arda, and Arda is marred beyond repair. Men, on the other hand, have the gift of Ilúvatar, death, which Tolkien describes as an escape from the circles of the world. When men die, they go somewhere beyond Arda entirely, somewhere that even the Valar don't fully understand. In this way, they can escape Morgoth's corruption, whereas the elves remain bound to the marred world. It's a deeply complex and somewhat melancholy vision. Evil in Tolkien's world isn't just a matter of bad people making bad choices. It's woven into the fabric of reality itself, a consequence of the first and greatest act of rebellion. And yet, there's hope in Tolkien's vision too, because even in a world fundamentally corrupted, goodness persists. The children of Ilúvatar continue to choose light over darkness, love over hate, sacrifice over selfishness. The fact that they do so in a world where evil has a kind of built-in advantage makes their choices all the more meaningful. Think about Sam in Mordor, carrying Frodo up the slopes of Mount Doom. He's literally walking through a land saturated with Morgoth's ancient corruption, now reinforced by Sauron's power. The very ground beneath his feet is hostile to everything good, and yet he persists. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. That moment, that choice, matters precisely because it's made in defiance of the corruption built into reality itself. Or consider Gandalf, returning from death after his battle with the Balrog. He becomes Gandalf the White, more powerful than before, a light in the darkness. Yes, he's a Maiar, one of the Ainur, but he chose to bind himself to physical form to help the peoples of Middle-earth, knowing that doing so would subject him to the Morgoth element, would make him vulnerable. And when he falls into darkness with Durin's Bane, he fights through that darkness and returns, a testament to the fact that the corruption can be resisted. These acts of courage and love and sacrifice, they matter more, not less, in a world where evil has corrupted the very ground beneath their feet. And here's something to consider. If Morgoth's power was dispersed into Arda, making the whole world his ring, then perhaps every act of goodness, every choice for light over darkness, every moment of love and sacrifice helps to weaken that corrupting influence. Not by removing it, that's impossible without remaking the world, but by showing that even in a marred world, evil doesn't have the final word. Tolkien was a Catholic, and his faith deeply influenced his mythology. The concept of Arda parallels the Christian doctrine of original sin, a fundamental corruption that affects all of creation, that can't be fixed by human effort alone, but requires divine intervention and cosmic renewal. But Tolkien's vision also insists on the importance of human and elven and hobbit agency. Yes, the world is corrupted. Yes, evil has a built-in advantage, but that doesn't excuse surrender or despair. Every choice to resist evil matters. Every light kindled in the darkness pushes back against the shadow. When we understand Morgoth's lingering influence, the depth and pervasiveness of his corruption, it reframes our understanding of all the heroism in Middle-earth. The Fellowship's quest wasn't just about destroying a ring or defeating a Dark Lord. It was about resisting the fundamental corruption of reality itself, about choosing light in a world where darkness was woven into the very fabric of existence. That's the full extent of Morgoth's shadow. He wasn't just a villain who was defeated and banished. He changed the nature of the world itself. He made evil not just a choice or a force, but a quality of matter, a taint in the very atoms of creation. And yet, despite all of this, despite the fact that his essence remains in every stone and tree, despite the fact that his creatures still walk the earth, despite the fact that his curse and his malice echo through the ages, goodness persists. Love endures. Hope survives. In the end, that might be the most important thing to understand about Morgoth's lingering influence. Yes, it's pervasive and inescapable. Yes, it means that evil will always find a foothold in Middle-earth until the world is remade. But it doesn't have the final word, because for all of Morgoth's power, for all that he poured himself into the world and corrupted it to its foundations, he could never corrupt the flame imperishable, the secret fire that Eru alone possesses, the source of true life and creation. The deepest truth of every living soul remained beyond his reach. That's why hope survives in Middle-earth. That's why, even in the darkest moments, there's always the possibility of eucatastrophe, the sudden joyous turn that Tolkien called the mark of good fairy stories. Not because the corruption isn't real, but because there's something in the children of Ilúvatar that even Morgoth at his height could never touch or destroy. The scar he left on the world is real and deep, but it's not the deepest reality. And until the last battle, until Arda is broken and remade, that tension between the corruption of the marring and the indestructible spark of the flame imperishable will define the struggle of all who dwell in Middle-earth. So when you read about Frodo's quest, or Aragorn's kingship, or Gandalf's sacrifice, or Sam's loyalty, remember that these choices mean even more than they might appear. They're not just acts of heroism in a fantasy world, they're defiant assertions of goodness in a world that has been fundamentally corrupted, where evil has been woven into the very ground they walk on. And that makes them all the more beautiful, all the more meaningful, all the more worthy of our attention and our admiration. Because in the end, Morgoth's greatest legacy isn't the orcs he bred, or the kingdoms he destroyed, or even the corruption he wove into Arda. His greatest legacy, perversely, is the heroism he made necessary, the courage required to resist when evil is built into the fabric of reality itself, the love that persists even when darkness seems inescapable, the hope that endures even when the world itself is against you. That's the paradox at the heart of Tolkien's mythology. Morgoth marred the world, yes, but in doing so, he created the conditions for a kind of heroism and beauty that might not have been possible otherwise, the beauty of light shining in deep darkness, the beauty of goodness that persists, not because it's easy or natural, but because it's chosen, again and again, in defiance of everything that stands against it. Thanks for joining us in this deep dive tonight. Until next time, stay safe and stay by the fire.